Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today we are returning to Fallout 76, where we're going to spend a little over 1,000 scrip on 3-star ranged legendary weapons with the Purveyor. There is a 25% discount in effect as I'm recording this, so that's why we'll be spending a little bit over 1,000, just so we can get an even 15 pulls. Please remember, if you enjoy content like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps the channel out, and it doesn't cost you anything. Alright, let's go on ahead and get started. So for our first 3-star ranged legendary weapon today, we get a Mutants combat shotgun, with the last round in the magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage, and faster movement speed while aiming. So the Mutants effect got a buff a few months back when all of the legendary effects got a rebalance. It used to be just a straight 10% damage if you had one or more mutations, a straight 10% damage bonus, that is. Now it's 5% damage bonus per mutation up to a maximum of 5 mutations for a maximum bonus of 25%. That's a significant increase, although it's still a bit low compared to many of the other effects such as junkies, aristocrats, bloodied, even anti-armor, and so forth. But at the same time, you're really not giving up anything for it for most players, because most endgame players are likely to be running 5 mutations at least anyway by the time you've got Speed Demon and Marsupial, probably either herbivore or carnivore, and probably at least a few others that are relevant to your particular build. So overall, it's not the worst effect, it's just it could be so much better. The second effect, the last round in the magazine, having a 25% chance to deal double damage, well, if you've seen any of my videos before, you know I consider that to be basically not having a second legendary effect on the weapon. That's because it's going to trigger so rarely, even if you are actually firing the last shot from the magazine, that you really can't count on it at all. So it basically does nothing. It's probably a little bit better on a weapon like this, like the combat shotgun, that's going to have a much lower ammo capacity, and you have a much higher chance of actually spending the last round in the magazine, even if you are performing those tactical reloads whenever there's a break in the fighting. But still, that 25% chance for it to happen is just way too low. And faster movement speed while aiming, if you've got the Speed Demon mutation, that is really not doing much of anything for you. So, unfortunately, combining that with the Mutants effect is probably a bit of a loser. But if you don't happen to have it, then it could do something, but I'm not sure how many players are really running around the battlefield while aiming. I think a lot of players, myself included, typically just aim, fire, then stop aiming, run to wherever they want to be, and then take aim again. So it probably helps a little bit if you do like to run around while aiming, but I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal for most players. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got Zealot's Gatling Laser with bashing damage increased by 50% and breaking 50% slower. So the Zealot's effect, just like all of the other Slayer effects, got a buff a few months back with the legendary rebalance. It has increased to 50% damage bonus, which is pretty good. And the Zealot's effect might be one of the more useful effects just because it does work on the Scorched Beasts and Scorched Beast Queens. So you do have times when you would specifically know you're going to be going and fighting Scorched in significant numbers. Not to mention that there are Scorched in various other locations, you know, for the events such as the recent Halloween event and the upcoming Christmas Holiday Scorched event. So it could be useful for that, although the extra damage on a typical Scorched is kind of unnecessary. Most weapons are going to put them down pretty quickly just because they're pretty squishy. The bashing damage increased by 50%. Well, that's really not doing much of anything for you. The bashing damage in this game is horrible. If you really spec for it, you might be able to get something half decent out of it. I've never really tried. I've heard that maybe you can, but I just don't really see that being a benefit. The big exception being the minigun. If you put a shredder mod on it, in that case, the bashing damage increased by 50% is a very desirable effect. This is not a minigun, so it's basically worthless here. The breaking 50% slower, that's great on pretty much any weapon, just because repairing your stuff is quite a pain, to be perfectly honest. So not having to repair it nearly as often, well, I don't think anyone's going to complain about that. It's not the best third star, but it's definitely not a bad one by any means. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have an Executioner's Harpoon Gun with 50% more 50% VATS hit chance and +1 perception. So the Executioner's effect is one of the better effects, at least situationally, because unlike most of the other legendary effects, I believe possibly all of them, it is actually still multiplicative to the best of my knowledge. So when it says it's plus 50% of the damage, more damage to your target, it's giving you plus 50% of the damage, showing you on your damage card in your Pip-Boy. So that's a good thing. This is probably not the best weapon for it, because a weapon like this, you're really wanting to put things down as quickly as possible, because it's not the fastest firing weapon, and even then you're going to have to be reloading it very frequently. So the Executioner's effect is not going to be doing anything for you at all if you're putting things down in one shot. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, that could be useful, because a weapon like this can serve to some extent as a bit of a heavy weapon sniper rifle. So that VATS hit chance allows you to target the heads with accuracy and or other weak points and get some extra damage that ways, as well as increasing the effective range, because it will help to offset the range drop off once you get past the range on the card. Yeah, you'll still see some damage drop off, but at least you'll be able to hit your target and get some damage on it. The +1 perception, that synergizes well with the VATS hit chance, because the primary benefit of getting +1 perception is the extra VATS accuracy. So overall, this one is not particularly exciting, but not the worst. I don't really see anyone running around with a weapon like this as their daily weapon, though. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a bloodied Gauss Pistol with replenishing action points with each kill and plus 250 damage resistance while reloading. So the Gauss Pistol is kind of an interesting weapon. It hits harder than pretty much any of the other pistols in the game as far as single shot, as long as you charge it up. The bloodied effect is the king of damage in this game, at least at this stage of the game. Its damage increase, I believe it's 80% at 20% health, which is where most players tend to run at, because that's where Nerd Rage takes effect, and you get benefits from Serendipity and several other things. So that's going to be very good on a weapon like this. The replenishing action points with each kill, that could also be very good, because most pistol users are typically running in VAT so that they can get some extra damage, partly by targeting the weak points and partly by getting some extra VATS critical damage, because most of the pistols in this game are quite underpowered. And frankly, the Gauss Pistol is not a major exception to that, at least when you compare it to the Gauss Rifle and the Gauss Shotgun. They are definitely both more powerful than the Gauss Pistol. So getting some extra damage there and getting some more AP with each kill so that you can keep using VATS effectively will definitely help out with the discrepancy there and keep you moving forward. The 250 damage resistance while reloading, that's not terrible. If you're going to get some extra damage resistance while you're reloading, is probably a pretty good time to do it, because you're not going to be able to fight back at that particular moment. But you're not really spending a ton of time reloading on a weapon like this, and the extra damage resistance you get, if you happen to be running armor that has somewhere between 300 and 400 damage resistance, then you're going to start seeing diminishing returns on exactly how much damage it's going to stop. It will help to some extent, but if you've got that decent armor, then it's only going to help so much. So overall, this is a pretty good weapon. I could see running around and actually playing around with this weapon, so I might actually hold on to this one and see how it does. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got an Aristocrat's Black Powder Pistol with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 1 perception. So the Aristocrat's effect is a new one that came about with the rebalancing of the legendary effects, and it's actually one of the best full health effects, possibly the best depending on your preferences. It basically gives you up to 50% extra damage as long as you have 29,000 or more caps on your person in the game, which at high level, that's not that difficult to do, especially once you've bought all the plans and various other things from the railroad vendors and things like that, the train station vendors and such that you really care about. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, that's going to be very good on a weapon like this because you really need to be killing things with one shot with the black powder weapons to make them useful. Yes, I'm aware that there is a glitch in the game that allows you to load a whole bunch of ammo into the black powder weapons and basically just keep firing them as if they are semi-automatic. I don't endorse using that glitch or really any other glitch because I believe in playing the game straight. So if you're playing the game straight, then you really do need to be killing things with one shot to make the black powder pistols or rifles effective. And getting that plus 50% VATS hit chance to target the weak points is going to help out with that, especially with some extra damage from the Aristocrat's effect. And then the plus 1 perception, that is also going to help with your VATS accuracy, so that's overall a very good weapon that synergizes pretty well. It's just too bad that these effects were all on a black powder pistol, because even on a well synergized weapon like this, black powder pistols are still fairly unexciting for most players. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got a vampire submachine gun, with the last round in the magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage and 15% faster reload. So the vampire's effect is one of the best effects in the game in my opinion, especially on faster firing weapons or shotguns. Basically, every time you hit your target with a round or a pellet from a shotgun, it gives you just a little bit of health regen. That's why it's not great on slow firing weapons, like it's not great on a hunting rifle or a black powder weapon or anything like this, but the submachine gun, that's a great weapon for the vampire's effect. If you've got a weapon like this, there's a very good chance you're going to be keeping yourself alive very easily. The last round in the magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage, my opinion on that has not changed. It's basically worthless. Even more so on this weapon, just because you've got a fairly decent magazine size, and you are likely to be reloading it between engagements whenever you have a spare moment. So really, it's not likely to do anything at all on this weapon. But the 15% faster reload, that's definitely a good thing on any weapon, any ranged weapon, and in my opinion, it is one of the best third star. Yeah, the 15% isn't a whole lot, but every little bit there helps, especially in a tight situation. So let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we have a Berserker's Harpoon Gun with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and 15% faster reload. So the Berserker's effect, before the rebalancing a few months ago, was weird in that if you were wearing no armor, basically had no damage resistance whatsoever, then it gave you a bonus to damage. However, if you had even a small amount of armor, it would actually do less damage than a non-legendary version of the weapon. They removed that effect when they did the legendary effect rebalancing, so that helps. But even so, the Berserker's effect is still one of the less desirable effects, largely because it's just so hard to stay alive when you have so little armor, or effectively no armor. It's much, much easier to stay alive at low health. That's why you see so many players running around with bloodied builds, and not many players running around with Berserker's builds. So, a weapon like this is probably not the best weapon. I'm not actually sure how loud the Harpoon Gun is. I haven't done any testing with stealth on it. So it's possible that it could be a half-decent weapon for the Berserker's effect if it is quiet, because then you could use it with stealth. But either way, not really a great first star. The second star, that's critical hits doing plus 50% damage. That is a good effect. That will get you some extra damage on VATS hits, and a weapon like this, unlike most heavy weapons, will be able to be useful in VATS, because even if it is taking up a lot of your AP per shot, you're going to be spending a lot of time reloading, and if you drop out of VATS while you're reloading, then that gives your AP time to refresh. So getting some extra damage there is a good thing, but I don't think it really makes up for the first star. And the third star, as we mentioned before, 50% faster reload, that's good on every weapon, but still, overall, I would have to say that this weapon is a loser. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And this time we get an instigating single-action revolver with the last round in the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage and 250 damage resistance while reloading. So the instigating effect is one of the effects that actually did not benefit during the legendary effect rebalancing a few months back. It was actually a patch a month or so after that it got nerfed, but it no longer does double damage. It's double the base damage of the weapon, not the damage you see on the damage card in your Pip-Boy, assuming that you've done anything to increase that damage, whether it be perks, chems, whatever. So it's still useful on a hard-hitting weapon like hunting rifle, Gauss rifle, things like that you're already got a reasonable shot of putting things down, or putting things down in one shot, but this is probably not the best weapon for it. The last round in the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage, well, I'm not going to beat that dead horse. That is just a bad effect. The 250 damage resistance while reloading, that one I mentioned before, it's not terrible, and it might actually be pretty good on this one, because I believe on the single action revolver, you actually have to reload each bullet. Your animation shows the reloading of each bullet in the chamber. So that could actually be more useful on this weapon than on many others, but overall, I'd say this weapon is a dud. Let's move on to the next one. And here we got a 2-shot short pump-action shotgun with bullets exploding for area damage and 250 damage resistance while reloading. So this one is interesting to talk about. The 2-shot effect is usually not particularly interesting. It adds plus 20% damage to the, plus 25% damage to the weapon, and that damage is divided up amongst 2 projectiles. Well, shotguns, when they shoot, they already fire 8 projectiles. So it actually just adds 1 more projectile, so a 2-shot shotgun of any type fires 9 projectiles instead of 8, and that extra damage is divided up amongst all of those projectiles. Meaning that 2-shot is not particularly exciting really anywhere, but especially on shotguns. 2-shot also has a drawback that it significantly decreases your accuracy. You will very frequently miss with one of those bullets from a 2-shot weapon firing 2 shots at the same time when it's not a shotgun. So overall, not a great effect, but it normally pairs very well with the explosive effect, the bullets exploding for area damage. I'm not exactly sure why, but 2-shot explosive weapons do tend to do very good damage. But the 2-shot doesn't really do a whole lot for the explosive effect on a shotgun, because shotguns are already doing very well with the explosive effect. So overall, the first effect is pretty unexciting on a shotgun, but the second effect is very, very good for a shotgun. The third effect I've already talked about, I won't get into detail on, but this is the kind of shotgun that I could see lower to mid-level player who hasn't gotten a whole bunch of legendary weapons running around with until they got their hands on something a little bit better. Let's go on ahead and move on to the next one. And here we've got an instigating short plasma pistol with plus 50% limb damage and plus 1 agility. So the instigating effect I talked about before, this is again probably not the best weapon for the instigating effect. The one thing about the instigating effect is that if you're using a fully automatic weapon with a reasonably high fire rate, then you will sometimes get more than one shot on the same target that gets the double damage from the instigating effect. That is a bug that really has to do with the communication between your system and the servers. It's not something that I would recommend counting on, and it's definitely unreliable, but it will happen while you're playing. But I don't really take that into account when I'm choosing whether to use an instigating weapon or not, and I recommend you do the same. So overall, this weapon, not the best weapon for the instigating effect. The plus 50% limb damage, if you modify this weapon to be fully automatic, then that could be decent. Not great, but at least get some utility out of it, because that increases the limb damage from every single shot, and it's probably going to take you some more shots with a fully automatic weapon than a semi-automatic weapon to put the same enemy down. But at the same time, the plasma weapons do tend to hit pretty hard if you mod them outright, so you're typically not going to need to put more than 2 to 3 shots onto an enemy before they go down, at least most enemies. So you might find some use for it on bigger enemies like behemoths or the endgame bosses, however. And the plus 1 agility, that one is good. You know, agility is always good because it gives you some more AP. If nothing else, it lets you sprint further. But if you are a VATS user, it gives you a little bit more VATS AP, so that's always a good thing. But I don't think it really offsets the mediocre nature of the other legendary effects on this weapon. So let's move on to the next one. And here we've got an Assassin's Gauss Pistol with plus 50% VATS hit chance and plus 1 perception. So the Assassin's effect is another one of the Slayer's effects that got a buff in the legendary effect rebalance. But unless you're doing a lot of PvP, I don't see where the Assassin's effect is likely to have a whole lot of benefit for you. Humans in this game generally are pretty squishy, and you can typically take them down in 1 or 2 shots, maybe 3 tops with most weapons, even non-legendary versions. So it's just not doing a whole lot for you. If you're playing PvP, however, it may be very, very much more effective. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, that's one of my favorite effects, and it helps you target the weak points as well as get a little bit more extra range, as I mentioned before, on weapons. So I won't go into a great deal of detail on that here, but overall, it's good for this weapon. And plus 1 perception, once again, it synergizes very well with the plus 1 50% VATS hit chance, but the overall mediocre nature of the first star, unless you're a PvP player, which I'm really not, then it's just not doing a whole lot for you. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one here. And here we've got a Furious Cryolator with the last round in the magazine having 25% chance to deal double damage again and 90% reduced weight. So the Furious effect is a decent effect on a fast-firing weapon because you have to put many shots on the target before you start seeing the full benefit from it. That makes it a little bit more useful against bosses and bigger enemies, while being simultaneously less useful against smaller, squishier enemies. So overall, that's actually not a terrible pairing with the Cryolator, because the Cryolator is kind of a niche weapon. It's not the sort of weapon that most players are going to run around with as their main weapon and try to do daily farming with, but it is the sort of weapon that can be useful for if one person is using it at, say, the Scorchbeast Queen or Earl or something like that, just to slow the boss down and make it easier for everybody else to kill them. And getting some extra damage from the Furious effect on that is not bad, but if you're using the Cryolator in that situation, damage is not really your primary goal. The last round in a magazine having a 25% chance to deal double damage, well, I'm not going to beat that dead horse. The 90% reduced weight, that's actually very good on a weapon like this because, as I mentioned, the Cryolator is sort of a niche weapon, not something that you're going to be using all the time. So having 90% reduced weight on it so that it's not taking up a ton of space in your inventory so that you can carry it around when you do want to use it, that's a good thing. Still, overall, I think the best effect for a Cryolator would be quad, and so this one is probably not that exciting for most players, even those who would want to use a Cryolator at a boss fight. So let's move on to the next one. And here we've got a quad short 10mm submachine gun with VATS critical hits doing plus 50% damage and 250 damage resistance while reloading. So the quad effect on a lot of weapons I feel like is not particularly effective. And this is kind of one of those weapons that I feel that way about, because you can generally put things down quickly enough that you can deal with the enemies that are in your immediate vicinity in one mag and then reload real quick before you move on to the next group of enemies. Meaning that quad isn't going to be doing a whole lot for you. Sure, it will help in endgame boss fights because those things are not going to go down quickly, but in most other situations, quad is not doing a whole lot. There are some definite exceptions, in my opinion. And it does definitely increase your DPS as long as you have targets at all times. But again, enemies tend to kind of clump together and be in groups, so unless you're getting swarmed, it's probably a bit lost on a weapon like this. The VATS critical hit's doing plus 50% damage. That is a very good effect. A weapon like this, you are at least potentially going to be using in VATS. I guess it depends on the player, but you certainly could use it in VATS and get some extra damage, both from targeting the weak points effectively and from getting those extra VATS criticals, and then getting some extra damage on top of that. That's just cherry on top. The 250 damage resistance while reloading, again, you know, everything I've said before about it applies here. This weapon should have enough of a magazine to be able to get you through most engagements far enough to where you can kill the enemies in your immediate vicinity, reload, and then engage the next group of enemies. So I don't know that it's going to do a whole lot for you. And let's go on ahead and move on to our last one here. And here we have a Nocturnal light machine gun with plus 50% VATS hit chance and breaks 50% slower. So the Nocturnal effect is like the Berserker's effect in that before the legendary effect rebalance a few months back, it was doing less damage than a non-legendary version of the weapon if it was daytime. They removed that effect, so that helps the Nocturnal effect greatly. But it still has the drawback that it's giving you no benefit whatsoever during the day. To myself and many other players, that is a big drawback. If you're the type of player who will remember to switch weapons based on in-game time of day, then by all means, the Nocturnal effect may be great for you because it does have solid damage bonus. I am not that sort of player, so I tend to avoid Nocturnal weapons. The plus 50% VATS hit chance, I've spoken about that before. It's probably a bit lost on a weapon like this. As you can see, this weapon has an extremely high fire rate. And so you're going to burn through your AP very, very quickly if you try to use this thing in VATS. And that means that you're not going to have a lot of AP for regular criticals. So overall, that effect's pretty much lost here. But the breaking 50% slower, as I've mentioned before, that's great on every weapon. But it's not good enough to really make this a good weapon, so overall, this one will probably get turned in as well. Alright, well, I thank you all for joining me, and we'll be back next week with another Scrip video, and I will see you then.